So I'm going to change the subject over to salt. Many speakers recommend no salt, but the book, The Salt Fix, recommends salt. Is salt good? Is salt bad? Some say we need to that we needed to hold water in the cells. That's one thing. And then the second question is, Dr. Greger talks about substituting potassium chloride for sodium chloride for salt. Is that a good substitute? Are there health risks to potassium chloride? So I'll ask that of Dr. McDougall. I think
he's muted. He's muted.
Hold on.
I think he muted himself.
Yeah, there you go. You're unmuted now.
Okay, I got some I think important thoughts on salt. First of all, we're salt seekers. The human body is designed to seek salt. We have salt taste buds on the tip of the tongue. That was not a mistake. I think a certain amount of salt is necessary and healthful. I think high salt diets, when you get into the extreme, say 11 to 15 grams a day, then you can have valid reasons to think there's a problem. All right. If you take the salt out of the diet, say, for example, you take and do a study, interpopulation study, where you reduce the sodium intake by 1,750 milligrams from 3,500 milligrams a day. The reduction in blood pressure is like 3 millimeters of mercury systolic and a 0.5 millimeter of mercury diastolic. It hardly makes any difference at all. But, and I talked to you about the Kempner diet, which is really low in salt. It's fewer than 0.5 gram. And it's very, very powerful. So when you get to those extremes, you really have a powerful maneuver to make. But the most important thing is people love to eat salt. And so we just started a program tonight. That's why I was a little late. We run a 12-day internet-based program, every month or two. And we just started a new big group. And I told them, I said, look, you may not like the food when you first start. Just pick out the salt shaker and sprinkle it on the soup or the salad or whatever. You'll love it. You see the salt. It's not the issue. The issue is the pig. Okay, it's not the bacon that causes people to be sick. In other words, the salt in the pig. It's the pig. It's a confounding variable that makes people ill. And so salt's really got a bad reputation. It's a scapegoat. But again, I say that with the idea that there is a level of sodium intake, and there are certain people, patients, like my patients with severe heart failure, severe edema problems, certain kidney disorders. They have to be on a rigorously low salt diet. But I don't think the general population should strive for that. I think they should strive for a salt. What we teach is this, is the basic McDougall diet is 500 milligrams of sodium. If you add a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, you add 1,125 milligrams of sodium. You've now brought the sodium intake up to 1,600 milligrams. If you have a massive heart attack and end up in the ICU, their low salt diet is 2,000 milligrams. Ours is 400 milligrams fewer than the person dying in the intensive care unit from heart disease. So we serve a low salt diet, but we put the salt where people can taste it on the surface of the food. They love it. And then they immediately love the diet. So, you got to be careful about what you say about salt. I can also make the argument, as you brought up, that, there's evidence that severe salt restriction, like the NHANES study. The NHANES study found that people who take in higher salt diets live longer. So, there's a lot of mixed evidence, but I think you can be certain of one fact. God didn't make a mistake by putting salt taste buds on the tip of the tongue. You don't enjoy salt as a mistake. You are a salt seeker. Salt's not the problem. It's the pig, not the bacon.
So for those that want to avoid salt, and going back to the potassium chloride, I'm not saying that they should, but for those that do want to, is potassium chloride safe?
It's dangerous. Okay, it's not just not safe. I had a patient that almost had cardiac arrest one night because his wife tried to make the spaghetti sauce with a 1/2 box of no salt. Okay, so potassium chloride is not a natural ingredient in the environment. This is something people do because they're so phobic about sodium. And I think it's a very unwise thing to do, besides that it tastes terrible. So no, I would not recommend it to any patient ever.
Okay. And Dr. Nagra, what are your thoughts on salt?
So yeah, as far as salt restriction, I don't think we need to go right to zero. You know, as Dr. McDougall had said, I think within reason, up to even about that 2,000, 2,300 mark, you don't really see an increase in risk of adverse health outcomes. At least the serious health outcomes tend to be well above that amount. So using a bit to flavor your food, especially as Dr. McDougall said, on the food, not necessarily mixed in where you don't taste as much, but on the food, you tend to use very little, and it can help flavor it and hopefully get you eating more of those healthy foods, the vegetables and whatnot as well. So I would agree with that. As far as the potassium chloride, I mean, I've definitely seen research, swapping salt for potassium chloride and reducing stroke risk in various randomized controlled trials. But I think there is a risk there for people with like kidney disease and whatnot, where using those potassium-based salts can be an issue because potassium intake, has to be limited during that time. So that's certainly a concern, and definitely you don't want to be using, a huge amount of it, as may have been the case there with one of Dr. McDougall's patients. But it just depends on your health status, and if you are otherwise healthy, I don't see an issue with using a bit of it to flavor food. But again, some people don't actually like the flavor that much either, as Dr. McDougall had mentioned there.
Well, we've been using these salt substitutes for, as long as I've been in medicine. Look how popular they are these days. Nobody buys them. They don't like them. Do you find your patients get into these potassium chloride?
I've certainly had some use them and actually like them a lot. I find that, and this is my personal opinion on it, is that they taste off by themselves, but when mixed into food, they do have a salty flavor. It's kind of odd how that works, but using it in a bit of food, I've noticed that it gives it a bit of a salty kick.
And Chef AJ, you were discussing earlier today during your demonstration about using seasoning for instead of salt, and that salt was sort of the cheater's way out. I forget exactly how you worded it.
I think salt is a cheap and lazy way to season. And with all due respect to Dr. McDougall, I never cared for salt, but I was raised on a no salt diet. My father was 50 when I was born and had already suffered his first heart attack. So my family didn't cook with salt. And I don't remember actually tasting salt until I was 7 years old. I was at a cousin's house and she handed me one of those pretzel rods with the salt on the outside, and I spit it out. I thought it was disgusting. So I never developed a taste of salt like, unfortunately, I did for sugar. So I'm not here to tell people to eat it or not eat it, but that I agree with Dr. McDougall that if they eat it, it should be on the surface of the food where the taste buds of the tongue can taste it. Then you'll use it judiciously. There is no point in cooking with it because it just completely dissipates. That's why people get more salt from eating things like bread and processed food than even from French fries or potato chips where the salt is on the surface. So people are going to use salt. I say use it as the finish at the table and let everybody add how much they want. Don't let the chef decide. You've probably seen these people that salt their food before they even taste it. How do they know? And I don't eat zero salt, by the way. I eat condiments with salt. I have barbecue sauce with salt, ketchup, mustard, salsa. So it's not like I'm on a zero salt diet. I just prefer to not cook with it and relying on other flavors to make it delicious. And I don't get complaints about my food that it needs salt, but I do own salt if people want to add it, but usually they don't. There are so many delicious spices now. There's a place called Local Spicery near me, and they also offer spices online. He just developed a vegan bacon spice. I love when Dr. McDougall said it's not the salt, it's the pig. But if people like that bacony taste, he made a salt-free, sugar-free bacon spice that will knock your socks off. So I just find that salt is lazy and not very creative. And I say, have it for the people that want to add it to the table. Don't cook with it. I recently had a Dr. Clarence Grimm on my show. It was introduced by Dr. McDougall, who worked with Kempner, and he said, where there is no salt, there is no high blood pressure. And that he claims to be the world's leading expert on hypertension. So I don't want to get into medically, but from a culinary standpoint, if you learn how to cook food properly, the other thing is citrus, lemon and lime juice, for example, our taste buds for sour right next to our taste buds for salt. And so when you give yourself something like balsamic vinegar or some kind of vinegar or citrus, you feel like you've had something salty when it didn't. when you're a hammer, you look at everything like a nail. And because most of the time I work with people that are food addicted, that are trying to lose weight, the more they salt the food, the more they'll eat. When we reduce the salt or take it away, it doesn't taste as good, like Dr. McDougall says, which is good because then they won't eat as much.
And so what would you recommend, just if you had to give the audience a couple of tips on seasoning that you gave them the lemon and lime, the citric acid. What else is good for missing salt?
So there are salt-free seasonings that are not fake or potassium chloride. There's Benson's Table Tasty. That's excellent. I know Dr. McDougall's wife, Mary, likes the one from, I believe it's called from Kirkland, from Costco, or 21. There's a really delicious one that they sell at Trader Joe's. There's even Mrs. I don't know if it's called Mrs. Dash's anymore, but there are so many delicious blends already. Frontier, just in your regular Rayleigh's grocery store. So try them. And, you can always add salt afterwards if you don't like it. But try more herbs and spices. They have medicinal properties. They're delicious. Smoked paprika, chipotle powder, jalapeno powder. There's just so many delicious flavors that you can be using in addition or instead of salt.
Okay. Now, Chef AJ had mentioned the idea of addiction to food. Dr. McDougall, what do you think about food addiction? Is that a real thing?
Well, Chef AJ and I actually had a chance to talk about that this past Monday. I don't know. I don't object to the word addiction. I just have a hard time relating to it. In my life personally, I've had, some addiction issues, like tobacco, for example. I know what real withdrawal from an addictive substance is like. I don't see people giving up steaks and cheesecakes and so on, going through the kind of withdrawal that an alcoholic goes through when they quit booze. Those are addictions, or a heroin addict to go through when they quit their opioids. So, when I think of addiction, I think of this kind of serious relationship that when you stop it, you go through withdrawal. I mean, painful withdrawal. And I don't see that in my patients. So I have to call it habituated rather than addiction because of my reference point.
Dr. Nagra, what are your thoughts on the subject?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really interesting perspective as far as like what would classify as addiction. I would say that food addiction is certainly a thing and exists. And the way I would look at it is this sort of craving or need for something that affects your life, like affects your daily life. And I think that can absolutely be the case for food for a lot of people. The issue is, how is that diagnosed? How is that treated? Like, we don't have a firm diagnostic criteria for something like that, which also makes it a bit subjective and a bit more difficult to give a firm answer for. But I would say I lean on the side of, yeah, it is a thing, but how do we classify that and treat it is a whole other question.
I've never seen anybody have seizures giving up chocolate cake, but I have seen.
Yeah, no, I don't take the position that withdrawal is necessary to claim something is an addiction. That's the difference in the sort of criteria.
What about caffeine, for example? I've gone off of caffeine, and it's you get a headache and that type of stuff, but that's pretty mild.
I would call that addiction because you have a withdrawal symptom, and that's why from my reference point, from having the knowledge of what happens to people when they give up coffee, we used to. When we didn't serve coffee in our program, we do now. We serve dark teas, black teas, is we used to have withdrawal so severe in our participants that came to the program that they would often spend the first 2 days in bed. They were so depressed, had such terrible headaches. That's an addiction. Again, I don't see that kind of physiologic change taking place when people give up pork chops or whatever.